Really glad we can jump into this today, and it's thanks to you, our listener. You sent over this great pile of material articles, notes, asking about something, well, pretty fundamental to Japan.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, actually. We're going to look at Japan's fiscal year, the April 1st to March 31st timing. It's different from most places.
Right, most use the calendar year.
Exactly. So we'll dig into why April, how that happened historically, what it actually means day to day in Japan now. And honestly, some of the connections here are maybe a bit surprising. They go beyond just finance.
Okay, so that's our mission. Unpack these sources, trace the history, find the reasons, and map out the effects of this unique national timing. Let's get started. So where do we begin? I guess we need to go back, right? The sources point to, well, before the Meiji era, before things got really modernized. What did finance look like then?
Well, yeah, before the Meiji Restoration, which kicked off around 1868, Japan was operating very differently. They used lunisolar calendars, heavily tied to agriculture.
Makes sense. Farming cycles.
Absolutely crucial. They guided planting, harvesting. I mean, the whole rhythm of life and the economy was locked into those seasons and crop cycles.
But then, bam, the Meiji Restoration hits. And it's this period of just incredibly rapid change, isn't it? Turning away from the old ways, embracing Western ideas and systems like crazy.
Oh, massively. And one of the really stark, immediate changes the new Meiji government made was switching to the Gregorian calendar. The sources say it was super quick, like announced November 1872, boom, effective January 1st, 1873.
Wow.
Yeah. People like Fukuzawa Yukichi, the famous intellectual, they argued for it made sense globally. But you can imagine it caused a fair bit of confusion for ordinary folks at first.
Okay, I get the calendar switch. But here's where it gets interesting, based on these notes. The calendar starts January 1st, 1873. But the fiscal year, they set that for April 1st. That feels intentional.
It really does. And that difference is key. It tells us choosing the fiscal start date wasn't just like an automatic thing that came with the new calendar. No, it was a deliberate, separate policy choice they made.
So they needed a new system for their finances, but they didn't just default to Jan 1st.
Exactly.
And why the push for a unified fiscal year anyway? The sources really hammer home the government's need for a stable, centralized financial system. They had huge modernization plans to pay for.
That's where the land tax reform of 1873 comes in. It was huge, absolutely pivotal.
Okay, tell me about that.
Basically, they shifted from collecting taxes in kind, like actual rice or other crops, which, varied wildly year to year.
Right, depending on the harvest.
Yeah. They switched to a cash tax based on a fixed value assigned to the land itself. Suddenly, the government had a predictable, stable income stream. It wasn't tied directly to how good the rice harvest was that year anymore.
Ah, okay. So the government's budget wasn't quite so vulnerable to bad weather or pests affecting the crops.
Precisely. And to manage this new cash-based system effectively, they needed a single nationwide fiscal year. It was about control, about predictability, and about directing that stable revenue towards, building factories, railways, a modern military, the whole Meiji project.
Right, so they needed this new fiscal year structure for their modern state, cash taxes sorted, and they land on April 1st. Why that date specifically? The sources seem to explore a few ideas.
Yeah, there are definitely theories. One you hear mentioned is the British influence theory. The idea is that during this big push to westernize, Japan looked at Britain, which also had an April-ish start, and sort of copied it.
Okay, but how solid is that? The sources seem a bit cautious, saying it's up for debate or pushed by some experts. Doesn't sound like a slam dunk.
No, it doesn't feel like the definitive answer according to these materials. It's plausible there was some influence, maybe, but probably not the whole story. Another common idea, maybe more intuitive, is linking it back to agriculture. Like maybe April aligned better with the end of one cycle and the start of another.
It feels natural given Japan's history. Rice planting or something.
It feels right, but the sources actually push back on that a bit, specifically regarding the tax collection under the new system. Remember the land tax reform?
Yeah, cash-based.
Right. So because tax was now cash based on land value, the government didn't need to wait for the harvest to be fully completed and collected in the traditional sense to get its revenue. The timing of tax collection wasn't directly dictated by the rice being in the barn anymore. Sure, farming has its seasons, rice planting, usually May, June, harvest, August, November, wheat a bit different, but the tax system itself had changed fundamentally.
Okay, so if it wasn't definitely the British, and the direct link to the harvest for tax reasons was weakened by the reform, what's left? What do the sources say is the most likely driver?
Governmental pragmatism.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. Budget planning.
Oh, the practical stuff. Always the practical stuff.
Pretty much. The April to March cycle just worked really well for the government's own process. It meant they could spend the early months of the calendar year debating and finalizing the national budget.
Get it all signed off in March.
Exactly. And then it's ready to roll, funding allocated, plans in place, right on April 1st, day one of the new fiscal year. Super clean start.
And the sources lay out that timeline, right? Ministry of Finance drafts it, sends it to the cabinet by, what, end of January?
Yep. Then the parliament gets a good 2 or 3 months to really chew on it, debate, make changes, and approve it.
That seems efficient. Avoids rushing.
It does. The sources mention the FY 2025 budget as an example, enacted March 31st, 2025, literally the day before the fiscal year began. This whole structure helps avoid those messy stopgap funding measures you sometimes see elsewhere. It's built for a smooth transition.
Okay, so practicality seems key for the government side. But what I found really fascinating in these sources is how this April 1st thing just spread. It didn't stay confined to government ledgers. It became like the pulse of the whole country.
It really did. And a massive piece of that puzzle is the academic year. Schools, universities in Japan, they start in April, they finish in March.
That alignment is huge. Was that always the case, or did it develop? The sources said it was standardized by the early 1900s.
Yeah, it wasn't immediate with the Meiji Restoration, but it solidified fairly early on. And yes, the link seems to be funding. Public schools relied on government money,
which operated on the April-March fiscal year.
Bingo. So lining up the school year just made practical administrative sense. And think about the social rhythm that creates. You get this huge wave of graduations all happening in March. Then boom, April 1st, new school year starts, new students enroll. It's a massive synchronized national event.
And that wave just rolls right into the corporate world, doesn't it? Because most Japanese companies also adopted the April-March fiscal year.
Yes. Partly practical, again, dealing with government contracts, regulations, reporting. But it also meshed perfectly with that academic cycle you just mentioned.
Because where are all those March graduates heading?
Straight into their first jobs, often starting on April 1st. So you get this enormous concentrated hiring season for new grads kicking off right as the new fiscal and academic year begins. It's this incredible alignment.
And the sources add another layer, the cultural one, this idea of Shinseikatsu.
Right, Shinseikatsu, or asuko. It means new life or new beginnings. April in Japan is springtime. It's cherry blossom season. There's this really powerful cultural vibe of renewal, starting fresh.
So the practical timing gets reinforced by this feeling of a natural new start.
Exactly. The sources argue this cultural resonance makes the whole April start feel even more natural and right for people. It's not just about budgets or school years. It taps into something deeper.
And even things like Coming of Age Day, Seiji no Hai, in January, the sources connect that too.
Yeah, it's another subtle link. The day celebrates those who turn the age of majority used to be 20, now shifting towards 18 for some things between April 2nd of the previous year and April 1st of the current year. So that definition itself is pegged to the April 1st cutoff.
Wow. So the sources basically describe this really strong feedback loop, don't they? Government fiscal choice influences schools, shapes graduation and hiring, reinforces a cultural feeling of new beginning in spring.
That's a perfect summary. It's this deep interconnection that makes the April start so ingrained. It's much more than just an accounting convention. It's woven into the fabric of Japanese life. And probably pretty hard to change because of that.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty then, the actual economic and administrative effects that these sources highlight for today.
Okay, well, for the government, obviously, it provides this really stable framework for budgeting, not just the national government, but local ones too. The sources mentioned the LGFP, the Local Government Financial Plan.
Right.
That plan helps guide local finances, and aligning it with the national April-March cycle means local governments get predictable funding streams, smoothing out bumps in their own tax revenues year to year. It helps stabilize things across the board.
And we already touched on that efficient budget process finishing in March for the April 1st start. That's clearly a huge plus administratively. The scale is immense, too. You mentioned the FY 2025 budget being, what, 115 trillion yen?
Yeah, 115.20 trillion yen. And the sources break it down. You see the big chunks like social insurance taking over a third. Paying national debt interest is almost a quarter. Then revenue relies heavily on sales tax, income tax. It's incredibly complex.
But the system allows it to be processed and enacted right on time, year after year.
Which is critical for keeping the whole government machinery running smoothly from April 1st.
Okay, and how does this April-March rhythm play out for companies and the markets?
Well, it dictates the main reporting season. Most big Japanese companies wrap up their financial year on March 31st. Then they spend April finalizing numbers, and results typically come out in May.
The sources gave examples, right? Like Fukoku Co. and Japan Post Holdings both announcing May 15th for this year.
Exactly. So May becomes this intense period for analysts, investors, everyone digesting the performance of corporate Japan. It creates a very predictable cycle for market information.
And that affects market behavior. Like the sources mentioned, share buybacks often happening in April.
Yeah, companies might announce buybacks early in the new fiscal year, maybe using profits from the year that just ended. It also means you often see analysis comparing Japanese stock performance over fiscal years, looking at earnings trends, dividends, things like the Nikkei 225 index movements during that April-March period.
Interesting. Now, what about taxes? There was a curious split mentioned in the sources. Corporate tax follows the fiscal year, but personal income tax doesn't.
That's right. Corporate taxes align April-March, makes sense. But individual income tax is based on the calendar year, January 1st to December 31st.
And people file those taxes between mid-February and mid-March, typically.
Yes. And the sources offer a specific reason for this timing. Why finish individual taxes before the government's new fiscal year kicks off on April 1st?
Efficiency.
Administrative efficiency. It avoids creating a massive backlog for the tax authorities. They can wrap up processing the bulk of the previous calendar year's individual returns before they have to fully pivot to managing the new fiscal year's budgets and corporate tax flows starting April 1st. It keeps the two mainstreams slightly offset.
Clever. So it sounds incredibly synchronized, maybe even elegant in its own way. But surely there are downsides. The forces hint at operational stress.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. You're crunching year-end numbers in March, then bam, April hits. You're launching new budgets, new projects, maybe integrating acquisitions, and welcoming and onboarding that huge wave of new graduates and hires.
All at once.
All at once. March, April may become this incredibly intense pressure cooker for many departments, HR, finance, planning. The sources specifically mentioned the insane workload peak for accounting and auditing firms during this period.
And then smack in the middle of this frenzy, you get Golden Week, late April, early May. A string of public holidays.
Right, which is great for a break, but it can also disrupt workflow right when things are at peak intensity. And the sources even touch on this phenomenon, sometimes called gogatsubyo.
May sickness.
Yeah, it's not a formal medical diagnosis, but more of a colloquial term for a kind of burnout or letdown people might feel in May after that intense start to the fiscal academic work year, the holiday interruption, and then facing a long stretch until the next break.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've journeyed through these sources, starting way back with the Meiji changes, the land tax reform being so key.
Looked at those debates around why specifically April 1st, was it the UK, agriculture, or, as the sources strongly suggest, really government practicality and budget timing.
And then we saw how the governmental choice rippled outwards, creating this incredible synchronization.
Yeah.
Academic year, corporate year, the massive hiring cycle.
All layered with that cultural feeling of Shinseikatsu, the new beginning in spring, making it feel deeply natural.
It really emerges from the sources as this highly functional system, deeply woven into Japanese society, providing stability for finance, for administration.
It's definitely functional. But, as we just discussed, the sources are clear. It also comes with challenges: that intense concentration of activity in the spring, the pressure points, the potential for burnout.
It's a really striking example of how a policy decision made, 150 years ago, can shape the rhythm of an entire nation today.
It really is. And maybe, thinking about what we've seen in these sources, it leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. This level of nationwide synchronization is clearly efficient in many respects. But what might it mean for, say, individual flexibility, or for the whole system's ability to adapt really quickly if something truly unexpected throws that rhythm off?
Yeah, a system with that much shared momentum must be hard to steer quickly. Food for thought. Well, thank you again for sending in these materials. This was a fantastic deep dive.
Transform your trading with Forex Analytics' new platform. Introducing the complete market analysis platform, precision analysis, real-time insights. Subscribe today and save 40% on monthly subscriptions. Join us now and elevate your trading strategy.